Roddy Piper was extremely well known. He was a colorful character, whether you were a pro wrestling fan, as I was, or whether you were someone who just, watched TV and movies. You knew who this guy was. Hulk Hogan. I'm still allowed to talk about Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan, Macho Man, and Roddy Piper. These were household names, for the most part. I'm sure you could always find someone here and there, but anyway, Piper passed away. I believe it was Thursday. It was either Thursday or Friday this past week. And our thoughts and prayers go out to his family and loved ones. He will be forever remembered as one of the all-time great entertainers in his field of entertainment, and arguably in general in any field of entertainment. He was as good at what he did in the entertainment industry, as anybody at their craft. So again, rest in peace, Roddy Piper. Passed away at age 61 this past week. Alright. So, now that we've got that officially crossed off of the absolute must-to-do list here on the show this week, let's get into something a little more positive. As I was mentioning a little earlier, tonight, if you are a wrestling fan, on the El Rey Network is Lucha Underground's season finale episode extravaganza called Ultima Lucha. Now, usually Lucha Underground is a 1-hour episode every Wednesday night, and it's every week the best 1-hour televised, television program of wrestling ever done, at least that my eyes have ever seen. Granted, I haven't watched a lot of the Japan stuff, but that'd be about it. But tonight is the 2-hour season finale. If it was WWE, this would be a pay-per-view. Last week's 1-hour episode would be the pre-show for this pay-per-view. There were 3 matches. We previewed them. I do apologize in regards to last week's show, a slight correction. I did have the second and third matches on last week's episode in the wrong order on my match card preview. I do apologize. So let's recap that to get us caught up to the action that's happening tonight. And the great thing about, before we do that real quick, one of the great things about Lucha Underground, like I said, it's a 1-hour episode every week, except for with this episode is the first ever 2-hour episode. And like I said, because it's the season finale. But so every Wednesday on the El Rey Network, which is, like I said, the channel that this wrestling promotion is aired on, basically that whole afternoon, evening, and late night is nothing but Lucha Underground episodes. The recent ones catching you up to speed if you've missed, classic ones, and the new ones being played a couple different times. I live in Central Standard Time, so I give my times here as Central Standard Times unless otherwise specified. But the new episodes air here at Central Standard Time at 7 o'clock every night, so from 7 to 9. Very likely that immediately at 9 o'clock, since it's a 2-hour episode this week, that they will re-air that episode. Or I'm pretty sure from 6 to 7 they will air last week's 1-hour episode. So you will actually be able to see the whole show in its entirety, start to finish tonight. If you started watching at 6 p.m. So that's my guess for tonight, is that they'll just run those two shows on a 3-hour loop. They'll have the 1-hour show from last week start at 6, maybe an episode or two before that as well, random ones or lead up ones, and then they'll play the 2-hour one from tonight from 7 to 9, and then from 9 to 10 they'll go back to the 1-hour one from last week. And then from 10 to 12 they'll play. Something like that is what to expect tonight. So you should be able to catch it at any point, at some point in time. If you need to pause the show now and go check your program guide on your TV, I don't blame you. That's okay. You can totally do that. Just pause the show on whatever you're listening to it on. And then if you have to, you can watch Lucha Underground then and there, and then just resume the show at some later point in time. However, you can't do that on WNLMradio.com. I don't believe you would have to do that on the Spreaker app, or SoundCloud, or YouTube, or possibly TuneIn. But you do what you got to do. Point is, don't miss Lucha Underground Ultima Lucha tonight if you are a wrestling fan. And if you are a wrestling fan, or consider yourself a wrestling fan, and you haven't seen any Lucha Underground, there is no more excuse. You just need to do it. It's the best out there, bar none, at least that we have access to here in the States, and you just need to get out and do it. Alright, so on last week's 3-match 1-hour show, started off with Cage versus the Mac in a Falls Count Anywhere match. It was, as I predicted, amazing. Well, every match they ever have is amazing. With any of their wrestlers, it seems like. But, okay, so in WWE equivalents, they started their first of 3 matches on, basically their pay-per-view pre-show with a couple jobbers, bottom card, mid-card guys, called Cage and the Mac. Both big, strong guys, exceptional athletes. They had a ridiculous match. It was, I gave it on, if it's a 5-star match, this is kind of how us wrestling fans rate matches. My son looked at me afterwards and he's like, so what'd you think? What would you give that one? I was like, I don't know, 11 stars? 14 stars? It was perfect, awesome, amazing, incredible. Couldn't be any better. So that was the start last week. And then, as I said, when I previewed, I thought the Hernandez-Drago match was going to be second. It was not. That was the 3rd match on last week's episode, 1-hour episode. So the second match was for the Trios title, because in Lucha Underground they have, for their team championships, they have a 3-person teams division, not the traditional 2-person division. And another reason they do that is it helps to involve the female wrestlers, or luchadores, because in Lucha Underground, as I have emphasized here before on the show, in Lucha Underground there is complete 100% gender equality. There is no female title at all of any kind. The females wrestle for the same titles that the men wrestle for, period. And they wrestle, very rarely will you see a female versus a female match in Lucha Underground. Generally you see a female versus a male match, or you will see a female and a team of males versus another female and a team of male, a mixed gender match. But as it differs from WWE, they'll only let the women wrestle the women, generally. And that is not the case. We have tons of one-on-one luchador versus luchadores, luchadora, I should say, matches in Lucha Underground all the time. And they're great. The females in Lucha Underground are fantastic. All the competitors. The commentators, Matt Stryker, formerly of WWE, is one of the two commentators, and Vampiro, an all-time legend icon in the Lucha Libre circuits, is the other commentator. But anyway, back to last week's hour, and then we'll get to this week's big mega episode, and then we'll finish out the last bit of wrestling news and get to, like I said, other quote-unquote real sports. For the listeners out there who are looking for that sort of thing, don't worry, we will have plenty of that stuff on this week's show as well. So in the second match for the Trios title, like I said, 3-person teams, we had the Disciples of Death challenging the current champions, Son of Havoc, Ivelisse, and Angelico. Ivelisse is a female. She had an injury written in that played a part, obviously, in the match. It was ultimately exploited by the female manager of the Disciples of Death. I think her name is Carmen. Carmen. I'm pretty sure it's Carmen. I know it starts with a C. Carlita, Carmella, not Carmella. I'm pretty sure it's Carmen. But anyway, she's like their version of Paul Bearer, but she's smoking hot. And she doesn't have an annoying voice that, goes, "Oh, yeah." I mean, I had to do that. It was bad, I know, but I set myself up for it. So there you go. You're welcome, wrestling fans. I just intentionally embarrassed myself for you. Oh, and how could I forget this? Instead of an urn, she has like a red velvet bag with a rock and with a stone in it. The higher she holds it, then the more power it bestows upon the Disciples of Death. And also, it does the same for the mega superstar that she manages, known as Mil Muertes, who will be challenging Prince Puma for his championship in the main event tonight, but we'll get to that a little later. Slow down. Alright. But so, like I said, she ended up exploiting the injury on Ivelisse. Amazing highlight moments from Sons of Havoc and Angelico, as always. Those guys will find places in that arena to jump off of onto other people and do moves that will just always come out of nowhere and take you by surprise and make you jump off your couch and drop your jaw and go, "Oh!" I mean, and that's kind of Lucha Underground as an entity in itself. But, so, like I said, that's what happened in that match, and ultimately the Disciples of Death became the new Trios champions, making their stable, their brand, everything seem stronger, as, like I mentioned, their biggest dude, he's not in the, the Disciples. He's the man, okay? The Disciples of Death, WWE equivalent, are basically druids. Undertaker's druids. Take 3 of Undertaker's druids, and that's basically the Disciples of Death. And then Carmen is basically Paul Bearer, like I said. And then they have an Undertaker who's got a lot of Brock infused into him as well. He's like a combination of Brock and the Undertaker, and then put an evil, Lucha Libre mask on him. That would be Mil Muertes, and he's in the main event tonight. So, kind of no surprise there that they would, change those titles and build it towards the main event. Because they're just, you will notice that as a fan, or even if you're not a fan. If you're not a wrestling fan, but you're thinking, maybe I'd give it a try. I'd be open-minded enough to watch an episode of some wrestling. Watch Lucha Underground. God, don't watch like freaking SmackDown. And probably don't watch Raw either. Watch Lucha Underground. But so, like I said, super well written. It's awesome. It's not predictable every time. But anyway, in this case, it kind of was a little predictable. But the Disciples of Death become the new Trios champions. Then in our finals match last week, we had Hernandez versus Drago in a Believers Backlash match. Now, that's another correction I want to make to last week's show. I was